Hi, my name is James, and I'm 27 years old. What I'm about to share is a true story that happened 2 years ago. At the time, I had just moved into a new house. The house was in a quiet neighborhood where I didn't expect anything unusual. But what happened changed my perception forever. One night after coming home from work, I felt as though someone was watching me from the window of the house across the street. That house had been abandoned for years. I brushed it off, thinking I was just imagining things. Later that night, strange noises started coming from the attic. It sounded like something heavy falling. I told myself it was probably just rats, but the noises grew louder and more persistent until I had to go up and check. When I opened the attic door, I saw footprints in the dust-covered wooden floor, even though no one had been up there. My heart raced as I quickly shut the door and went back downstairs. The next day, I started noticing movements in the shadows around my house. Whenever I looked directly at them, nothing was there. Each night, the noises from the attic grew louder and more disturbing. One night, I woke up with a strange feeling and heard footsteps inside the house. When I went to check, no one was there. All the windows and doors were still locked. Finally, I decided to install security cameras to see what was happening. What the cameras captured made my blood run cold. It was a pale, gaunt man walking around my house every night since I moved in. I immediately called the police. They discovered that the man had been hiding in a crawl space under the attic for months. I can't even imagine how many times he must have watched me without me realizing it. Today, I've moved out of that house, but the feeling of being watched still haunts me. Hi, my name is James. I'm 28 years old and originally from England, but I've lived in the United States since I was a child. The story I'm about to share happened about 10 years ago when I was home for the summer during my college years. My family's house is in a small, quiet town in the Midwest, a large, secluded property surrounded by nothing but silence. The kind of silence that can be eerie at times. One summer night, I was home alone. My parents and younger brother had gone to an overnight party. I planned to spend the night catching up on some reading in the living room. Around midnight, I heard faint tapping sounds coming from the kitchen window. I assumed it was an animal, but as I got closer, I noticed fingerprints smeared on the glass. Someone had pressed their hands on the window trying to peer inside. A chill ran down my spine, but I told myself I might be imagining things. I went back to reading in the living room but turned off all the lights in the house, hoping to make it harder for anyone outside to spot me. Not long after, I began hearing soft footsteps circling the house. The deliberate, cautious pacing made it clear this wasn't an animal. Grabbing a kitchen knife, I called the police. They instructed me to lock all the doors and stay in a safe place. I hid in the small storage room under the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Minutes stretched into an eternity as I sat there. I heard faint knocking on the back door, followed by an eerie chuckle that sent chills down my spine. When the police finally arrived, the sound of their sirens and flashing lights brought a flood of relief. I ran outside to meet them, but they found nothing. No one was there. They searched the house and surrounding area, but discovered no signs of forced entry or evidence of someone lurking nearby. In the days that followed, I noticed faint scratches on the back door and kitchen window. To this day, I don't know what happened that night, but the memory still leaves me uneasy whenever I'm home alone. Hi, my name is John. I'm 29 years old, and the story I'm about to share happened 3 years ago. At the time, I was renting a small house in a quiet rural town in Europe. The nights there were dark and silent, which felt peaceful but sometimes eerily oppressive. One night, while watching a movie in my living room, I heard a knock at the front door. I walked over to open it, but no one was there. The wind rustled through the trees, and I thought maybe it was just the breeze. Not long after, another knock came, this time from the back door. I quickly checked through the window, but again, no one was there. Fear started creeping into my mind. I decided to lock all the doors and windows tightly and tried to ignore it. As I sat back down, I heard footsteps on the roof. I froze. These weren't the sounds of an animal. They were deliberate, human-like steps. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the signal was gone. I couldn't make the call. I picked up a flashlight and climbed to the second floor to look out the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A tall, shadowy figure was standing in the middle of my backyard. It wasn't moving, just staring directly at my window. I quickly shut the curtains and hid in my closet. Soon, the knocking on the windows began. Soft at first, but growing louder and more aggressive, as if it was trying to break in. I stayed hidden until I heard the sound of police sirens. When the police arrived, they searched the area but found no one. However, they discovered strange footprints circling the house. They were large and didn't resemble human footprints. The fear of that night has haunted me ever since. Years old, living in a small, quiet town in Europe. The silence here often feels like stepping into another time, but it also amplifies every strange sound. What I'm about to share happened 2 years ago, during a night when I was home alone. That day, I worked late and got home around 9 p.m. My house is at the end of a secluded street, surrounded by woods. As usual, I locked all the doors and windows before taking a shower. Afterward, I settled down to watch a movie in the living room, unaware that the night was about to turn into a nightmare. While engrossed in the movie, I heard a strange noise coming from the window behind me. It sounded like fingernails scraping against the glass. I turned to look but saw nothing except the reflection of darkness. I told myself it was probably just a branch swaying in the wind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound came again, louder this time. It was so distinct that I got up to inspect the window. Peering outside, I saw nothing. Suddenly, loud banging echoed from the front door. It was a forceful, deliberate knock, but when I opened the door, no one was there. Fear began to creep in. I turned off all the lights, grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife, and locked myself in the bedroom. Moments later, I heard footsteps circling the house. These were unmistakably human. Then came the laughter. It was faint but chilling, drifting through the bedroom window. It sounded wrong, almost inhuman. I immediately called the police and described everything. While waiting for them to arrive, the laughter continued, relentless and haunting. When the police arrived, they found no one, but they did discover scratch marks on the windows and back door. To this day, I have no idea who or what was behind it. The memory still sends chills down my spine every time I'm alone at home. Hi, my name is Mike. I'm 31 years old. The story I'm about to share happened 4 years ago when I was renting an old house in a suburban area of Germany. The house was on the edge of a forest, peaceful but eerie, especially when you were alone. One cold night I came home from work, exhausted. I decided to take a quick shower and go to bed early. Not long after, I heard a faint rattling at the front door. It sounded like someone was jiggling the doorknob. I went to check but found no one. Thinking it was just the wind, I locked the door securely and returned to my bedroom. As I was about to fall asleep, another sound broke the silence. This time, a faint tapping noise coming from the kitchen window. My heart started racing as I went to investigate. Turning on the light, I peered outside, but all I saw was darkness and the shadowy outlines of trees swaying in the wind. I tried to ignore it and went back to bed. But then, footsteps. They echoed clearly from outside, circling the house. It wasn't just my imagination. Someone was out there. I grabbed a kitchen knife and locked myself in the bedroom. Moments later, the knocking started again. This time it was on the front door, loud and forceful. I called the police immediately, my voice shaking. As I waited, the knocking stopped, replaced by low, mocking laughter. It sounded like whoever, or whatever it was, knew exactly where I was. When the police arrived, they found no one around the house. However, there were strange footprints on the grass. They were enormous and didn't look human. After that night, I moved out of the house immediately. To this day, I still wonder who or what visited me that night. My name is Jason, and I'm 24 years old. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Oregon. My parents had left for a trip across the country to visit relatives, leaving me to care for our decades-old home. The house creaked and groaned like any old building, but what I experienced that winter night was far from ordinary. One cold winter night, snow blanketed everything in a thick silence. I was watching TV in the living room, enjoying some snacks and soda, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the kitchen. The heavy thuds on the wooden floor stopped me in my tracks. I cautiously walked to the kitchen, only to find it completely empty. The doors and windows were still tightly locked. I tried to convince myself it must have been the wind or some creaking floorboards, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Throughout the night, the eerie noises continued, shifting from one area of the house to another. Sometimes it sounded like whispers, other times like faint laughter. A chilling sensation crept over me, as though unseen eyes were watching my every move. I tried calling my parents, but the phone signal had mysteriously dropped. Just as I was about to fall asleep, my bedroom door creaked open slightly. I jumped up and turned on the lights, but no one was there. Shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of my room, sending shivers down my spine. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but when I heard my name being whispered from downstairs, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Grabbing a flashlight and a kitchen knife, I decided to check the entire house. When I reached the basement, I found the door wide open. I distinctly remembered locking it earlier. The air felt unnaturally cold, and I hesitated at the top of the stairs. Should I go down or run out of the house? Summoning my courage, I descended the stairs and followed a trail of snowy footprints leading to a dark corner. There, a shadowy figure sat hunched over. My heart pounded as the figure turned to face me. A pale face with wide, sleepless eyes stared back. I bolted upstairs and slammed the basement door shut, locking it tightly. A loud banging sound followed. I called the police, who thankfully arrived within minutes. But when they opened the basement, it was empty. No figure, no footprints. The most horrifying part? When the police reviewed the security footage, it showed a man climbing through the basement window hours earlier, disappearing into the shadows. My name is Ethan, a 30-year-old living in a secluded house on the outskirts of a small town in the Midwest. Surrounded by dense forest, the quiet might seem unsettling to some, but I found it peaceful, a perfect escape from the chaos of urban life. One evening, I was home alone as my girlfriend had gone to visit her family across the state. It was a cold night, and the moonlight barely illuminated the surroundings. I turned off all the lights except for the living room lamp. While reading a book, I heard an unusual sound outside, a crackling noise like something walking through the woods. I brushed it off, assuming it was just wildlife, but the sound grew closer, inching toward the house. It felt unnervingly near. I looked out the window only to be greeted by the shadows of swaying trees in the pitch darkness. Around midnight, as I prepared for bed, I heard a soft knocking at the back door. It wasn't a normal knock, slow and rhythmic, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I tiptoed to the door and turned on the porch light, but no one was there. I locked all the doors and went upstairs, but the strange noises continued. This time, it sounded like footsteps crunching on gravel. Fear crept in, and I grabbed a kitchen knife while dialing the police, who assured me they'd arrive in 15 minutes. Before they arrived, I heard a loud thud near the downstairs window. Rushing down, I saw the window slightly ajar and small footprints just outside, as if someone had been standing there moments before. The police came and searched the area but found nothing, attributing it to pranksters or wildlife. But I wasn't convinced. The next morning, I reviewed the security footage. What I saw chilled me to the bone. A man in a black cloak pacing around my house several times before attempting to pry open the window. My name is Jake, and I'm 27 years old. This story happened 3 years ago. Back then, I was renting a small house in a quiet suburban area of Pennsylvania. It was too silent for my liking, but the rent was cheap, and it wasn't far from my workplace. One freezing winter night, I decided to stay home alone, enjoying the warmth of my living room while binge-watching Netflix and sipping hot cocoa. Around midnight, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the kitchen window. I tried to convince myself it was just a tree branch or the wind, as the house was near the woods. But the sound didn't stop. It came again, repeatedly, in the same rhythm. Feeling uneasy, I went to check the kitchen window. The moment I pulled the curtain aside, I froze. Outside, there was a dark silhouette resembling a person. My heart raced, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. Trying to calm myself, I returned to the couch, but strange things started happening. The living room lights flickered a couple of times and I heard footsteps creaking on the wooden floor in the hallway. I was alone in the house. I shouted, "Is someone there?" but got no response. The scariest moment came when the bedroom door, which I had closed earlier, slowly creaked open. A faint shadow stood behind it. Grabbing a kitchen knife in panic, I cautiously entered the bedroom. The room seemed normal, except for the window that was now open, letting in the icy cold air. I quickly shut it and locked the bedroom door. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. That night, I stayed at a friend's place and moved out of that house the following week. My name is James, 28 years old, and I've always enjoyed the solitude of living alone. One autumn day, I found a house in the suburbs at an unbelievably low rent. The landlord mentioned it had been vacant since the previous owner's death. None of the relatives wanted to stay, but I wasn't superstitious, so I saw it as an opportunity and moved in immediately. The first night went smoothly, but on the second night, something felt off. Around 2 a.m., I heard faint whispers, like a woman murmuring. I went downstairs to check the living room, but there was no one. The following night, the whispers turned into a low, eerie laughter coming from upstairs. I rushed to check, but found every room empty. Though unsettled, I convinced myself it was just the creaking of an old house. On the fourth night, I woke up to the sound of something falling. When I turned on the kitchen light, I saw a chair tipped over. The windows were closed and there was no wind. It didn't make any sense. By the fifth night, I locked every door tightly, yet I heard knocking at my bedroom door. It wasn't a soft knock. It was as if someone was trying to break in. I shouted, "Who's there?" but got no reply. Armed with a kitchen knife, I opened the door and found nothing. The last night, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow in the reflection of the window. It was a figure standing right behind me. I turned around instantly and saw a woman. Her eyes were pitch black, and her smile stretched unnaturally wide. I bolted out of the house that night and never went back. I don't know who she was or what I saw, but one thing was clear. That house was never truly mine. My name is Michael, and I'm 27 years old. This incident happened 3 years ago when I lived alone in a small detached house in a quiet town in northern Pennsylvania. I worked from home as a graphic designer. The house had a history. The previous owner mentioned someone had died there, but the price was too good to pass up, so I bought it without a second thought. One night I was working late, around 2 a.m. The wind outside was howling, making the windows rattle. I turned off my computer, ready to head to bed, when I heard a strange sound. It was faint, like soft footsteps coming from the kitchen. I figured it might be noise from the neighbors since the houses weren't far apart. But as the sound grew louder, it became clear someone was walking toward the living room door. A chill ran down my spine. Grabbing the nearest object, a metal ruler, I cautiously stepped out to investigate. The dim light from the living room illuminated a shadow by the door. I shouted, "Who's there?" No response. The shadow froze for a moment before slowly disappearing. I checked the door. It was still locked, with no signs of forced entry. I started to think I was just tired and imagining things, but then a knock came from the back door. This time it was unmistakable. I rushed to turn on the lights and check, but when I opened the curtains, no one was there. Peering into the backyard, I saw something under the streetlight. It looked like a person, but it was unnaturally tall. I quickly shut the curtains and called the police. While waiting, I heard scratching sounds along the walls of the house, like nails or something sharp dragging across the siding. The sound stopped when the police arrived. They searched the area but found nothing except deep scratch marks on the walls. They advised me to install security cameras. After that night, I didn't hear anything unusual again. But there's one thing I've never told anyone. On my last night in that house, I checked the security footage to make sure everything was fine. The backyard camera captured something. A tall figure in tattered clothes staring directly into the camera with a grin that still haunts my nightmares. Hello, my name is Jacob and I'm 24 years old. This is the story of why I'll never stay home alone again. Even after 5 years, that night still haunts me. At the time, I had just moved out of my college dorm into a small single-story house I rented near my job. Everything seemed perfect at first. The house was quiet, and I finally had some personal space. However, not long after moving in, I started hearing strange noises in the house. It began as faint tapping at the kitchen window. I thought it was probably a branch or an animal, but when I went to check, there was nothing there. On the third night, the noise came back. This time it was coming from the basement. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm weather. Determined, I decided to check it out. As I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoed unnervingly, and it felt like there was another set of footsteps following me. I tried to convince myself it was just an echo, but fear took hold when the basement light flickered and I heard faint whispers from the dark corner. I bolted back upstairs and slammed the basement door shut. That's when I noticed scratch marks on the door, as if someone or something had tried to climb up. I vowed never to touch that door again. A few days later, things got worse. I woke up to find the front door wide open, even though I was sure I had locked it. I began hearing footsteps at night, but every time I checked, no one was there. One night, everything changed. While I was watching TV in the living room, the lights in the house went out. I was enveloped in darkness. Before I could grab my phone, the lights flickered back on. That's when I saw it. There was a shadow of a person standing in the corner of the bathroom. I froze, staring at the shadow, but no matter how many times I blinked, it didn't disappear. Summoning all my courage, I approached and opened the bathroom door, only to find it empty. That was the last time I stayed in that house. I moved out the next day, and since then, I've never rented a place alone again. My name is Michael. When I was 26, I moved into a single-story house in a small town in Washington state. The house was old but affordable, perfect for someone starting fresh like me. But what I encountered in that house made me swear never to live alone again. On my first night there, everything seemed fine until late at night. I woke up to the sound of running water in the kitchen sink. I was certain I had turned it off before bed. When I went to check, everything seemed normal, but I felt a strange unease. The next day, I began hearing footsteps in the living room, even though I was alone. I tried convincing myself it was noise from the neighbors, but the sounds grew louder, seeming to come closer and closer. My fear started to take hold. The third night changed everything. While I was working in my bedroom, the power suddenly went out. Grabbing a flashlight, I started checking the house. As I passed the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow of someone standing by the window. When I shone my flashlight, there was nothing there. The next night, I woke up again, this time to the sound of the basement door being knocked on from the inside. I was too scared to open it, but then the door slowly creaked open on its own. I slammed it shut and dragged a couch to barricade it. On my last day in that house, while packing up to leave, I heard faint laughter coming from the basement. It sounded like a woman's voice, but it was chilling. I didn't even think about investigating. I left some of my belongings behind and fled the house for good. My name is James, 27 years old. I have a personal story that still haunts me to this day. It happened 2 years ago when I was living in a small rental house in a quiet European town. The house seemed ordinary from the outside, but it was one night when I was home alone that made me question reality itself. It was a Friday night. I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching a movie. Every light in the house was on, and the quiet street outside added an eerie vibe. As midnight approached, I heard an odd sound from the second floor. It was the faint creak of footsteps. I paused the movie and listened intently. The sound stopped. I brushed it off as the usual creaking of wooden floors, but as I approached the stairs, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadowy figure moved past my bedroom door. I froze, my heart pounding. I decided to climb the stairs slowly, but with every step I took, the sound of footsteps seemed to retreat further away. When I reached my bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open. The room looked normal, but something caught my attention. On the mirror of the vanity table, there were fresh fingerprints. What made it even more disturbing was that they were smudged with dirt. Panicked, I rushed back downstairs to call the police, only to find my phone missing. I clearly remembered leaving it on the coffee table, but it was gone. Suddenly, I heard a faint chuckle coming from the kitchen. Holding my breath, I cautiously entered the kitchen. There was a sharp knife lying on the table, and next to it was a message scrawled in messy handwriting. "I've been watching you." I bolted out of the house without looking back. After that night, I moved out immediately. The incident remains a mystery I dare not solve. I can only wonder, how did that person get in and who were they? My name is Eric, 29 years old. I have an experience that still keeps me from staying home alone to this day. It happened 3 years ago when I had just moved into a suburban house in England. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by a shadowy patch of woods that became unsettling at night. That Saturday night, I planned to relax after a long week of work. I was playing video games in the living room, snacking and drinking beer. The atmosphere was unusually quiet. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like someone tapping on the glass at the back of the house. I turned to look, but saw nothing, just the swaying shadows of trees in the wind. I dismissed it as nothing, but less than 10 minutes later, the same tapping sound returned. This time it came from the glass door at the back of the house. I cautiously approached the curtain and peeked through. A dark figure stood in the middle of my backyard. I called out, "Who's there?" but got no response. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I felt a growing unease that wouldn't let me rest. I decided to turn off all the lights in the house to see if anyone was still outside. As soon as the lights went out, I saw it, a pale face staring through the window, wide eyes unblinking fixed on me. I froze, unable to breathe. I ran to the front door to escape, only to find it locked from the outside. At that moment, I had no idea what to do. I sat on the floor, my mind racing with questions. What is happening? Footsteps echoed inside the house. I turned to look, and the last thing I remember was warm breath near my ear and a whisper. "You were never alone." My name is Matt, 32 years old. Several years ago, something happened that still makes me afraid to stay home alone. I was living in a Victorian-style rental house in England, located in a quiet, almost eerily silent neighborhood. It was a Friday night, and after a long work week, I planned to relax with a movie and some snacks. Just as I settled on the couch, strange noises came from the attic. It was a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being moved. I convinced myself it was probably rats or a loose pipe, but the sound persisted, and I started to worry. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check it out. Opening the attic door, I shone the light around. Everything seemed normal, but as I turned to leave, I felt the unmistakable presence of someone standing right behind me. I froze, my heart racing, but when I turned back, there was nothing there. I quickly went back downstairs to the living room, but the atmosphere felt colder than before. I tried to ignore it and continued watching my movie. A few minutes later, a soft knock came from the front door. I looked through the peephole but saw no one. Thinking it was kids playing a prank, I brushed it off, but just moments later the knocking returned, louder and more frantic. I decided to open the door. What I found was a piece of paper tucked into the door frame. The message on it, scrawled in messy handwriting, read, "You're not alone." Now paranoid, I locked every door in the house. Then came the sound of footsteps again, this time inside the house. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the screen lit up with a message. Too late. That was the last night I spent in that house. I moved out the very next day, and to this day I still wonder who or what was in that house with me that night. My name is Jake, and I'm 28 years old. I've always been someone who enjoys being alone. The house I rent is nestled deep in the woods of rural Indiana. The solitude and quiet are what I cherish most, until what happened last month made me question if I ever want to be alone again. That evening, I started my weekend with a movie, a cold beer, and the calm of the woods. My house has a large window that faces the forest, while the other walls are solid wood. Everything was perfect, until around 10:30 p.m. I started hearing faint footsteps outside. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the sound became more distinct, almost human, every time the wind died down. My pulse quickened. I turned off all the lights and sat quietly, listening. The sound was unmistakably boots crunching dry leaves, circling the house. A cold dread washed over me. I grabbed a kitchen knife and moved cautiously to the front door. The moment I stepped closer, the footsteps stopped. I stood there, holding my breath, the silence heavy around me. My heart pounded in my ears. I knew something, or someone, was out there. I locked the house up tight and returned to the couch, determined not to make a sound. Suddenly, I heard a soft tapping on the large window behind me. It grew louder. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Panicked, I grabbed my phone to call the police. No signal. It was as if I had stepped into a nightmare. Summoning all my courage, I crept to the window and peeked out. In the darkness, a flashlight beam swept through the woods. Someone was out there, holding it, staring directly at the house, but they didn't move toward me. They just stood there watching. Terrified, I hid in my bedroom closet, clutching the knife tightly. Time crawled. Then came footsteps, this time on the porch. The door handle jiggled and I froze, barely breathing. The door didn't open though. Moments later, the footsteps retreated, fading into the night. I stayed in the closet until sunrise. When I finally ventured outside, I found fresh boot prints surrounding my house. Whoever it was had been standing there watching me for hours. My name is Richard and I'm 31 years old. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Virginia, in a house I proudly bought with my hard-earned money. It's spacious, perfect for someone like me who loves peace and solitude. But one night, it became a place I never wanted to be alone in again. It was a Friday night. I planned to unwind after a long work week, sitting on my couch with a beer and a laptop playing a movie. The house was dimly lit for a cozy vibe. At around 11 p.m., a strange noise came from downstairs. It sounded like something falling to the floor. I brushed it off as my imagination, until I remembered, I don't own a cat or any pet. I cautiously went downstairs to investigate and found the back door, which I was sure I had locked earlier, slightly ajar. A cold breeze sent chills up my spine. I quickly shut and locked the door, trying to stay calm. Back upstairs, unease lingered. Then, faint footsteps on the stairs made my heart race. I wanted to believe I was hearing things, but the sound grew louder. Someone, or something, was inside the house. Grabbing my phone, I called the police while locking myself in the bedroom. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I heard movement just outside my door, like someone trying the doorknob. I stayed as silent as possible. After what felt like an eternity, the noise stopped, and the lights flickered back on. Summoning my courage, I opened the door, finding no one there. But on the wall was a chilling sight, a message scrawled in marker reading, "I see you." The next morning, the police investigated but found no one and no signs of forced entry. To this day, I don't know who or what was in my house. But that night taught me one thing. Being alone isn't always safe. My name is Eric, and I'm 29 years old. I live in a small house I rented in the countryside of Pennsylvania. It's a quiet, peaceful place surrounded by meadows and woods, perfect for someone like me. But one night, everything changed, and I never felt safe in that house again. It was a Saturday night after a long week at work. I planned to relax, watching a movie on the couch with just a few lights on. The wind rustled through the trees outside, everything calm until around 11:30 p.m. I heard a knock at the door. It was faint, but persistent. No one should have been visiting me that late. I hesitated but opened the door slightly out of curiosity. There was no one there. I shut the door and returned to the couch, but shortly after, the knocking came again. This time, it was from the back window. I rushed over, pulled back the curtain, but again, no one was there. My heart started to race. I checked the house and found the back door, which I was certain I had locked, slightly ajar. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and returned to the living room, trying to calm myself. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, from upstairs. I knew I was supposed to be alone, but those footsteps were coming down the stairs. Grabbing a kitchen knife, I braced myself for whatever was about to come, but the footsteps stopped abruptly. Gathering my courage, I went upstairs to investigate. On the wall, in red marker, was a message. "I'm watching you." My blood ran cold. I fled the house immediately. The police came the next morning but found no signs of anyone or anything unusual. That night changed me forever. I moved out of that house and never looked back. My name is Tom, and I'm 26 years old. I live alone in a small house I rented in Ohio, perfect for someone who enjoys peace and quiet like me. Nestled in a calm neighborhood with only a few nearby houses, it seemed ideal. But one night changed everything, making me question if being alone was ever a good idea. It was a Thursday night after a long day at work. I was relaxing in my living room, the lights dimmed for a cozy ambiance. The sound of the TV filled the silence of the house, until just before midnight when I heard something fall in the kitchen. Thinking it might be a dish tipping over, I went to check, but everything was in its place. The plates and utensils were perfectly arranged. As I turned to leave, another noise caught my attention, this time coming from the basement. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. With the lights still dimmed in the house, I switched on the basement light and cautiously descended the creaky stairs. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. The basement door, which I distinctly remembered locking earlier, was slightly ajar. I approached the door, peering into the darkness beyond, but there was nothing. No one. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe I had forgotten to lock it. But as I turned to head back up the stairs, a faint whisper echoed from the shadows. "Get out." My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I bolted up the stairs and slammed the basement door shut, locking it tightly. I didn't sleep at all that night, too terrified to close my eyes. The next day, I called a locksmith to check the house, worried someone might have broken in. But the locksmith assured me everything was secure. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks. Yet, deep down, I knew what I had heard wasn't normal. My name is Daniel and I'm 24 years old. I live in a small house in rural Wisconsin. I love being alone, and the quiet of this house has always brought me peace. But one night changed everything, making me see this house in a way I never had before. It was a Sunday night, and I planned to binge-watch movies and prepare for the upcoming week. Everything was calm, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. As I lounged on the couch, a strange noise came from the kitchen. A clinking sound, like a spoon hitting the floor. I went to check, but everything looked normal. Thinking I might have left something out of place, I dismissed it and returned to the couch. But not long after, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. I lived alone. There was no way those footsteps could belong to anyone else. Grabbing a knife from the kitchen, I cautiously climbed the stairs. The sound stopped abruptly as I reached the top. Every room was empty. There was no sign of anyone or anything. Trying to calm myself, I went back downstairs. But just as I sat down, a loud knock came from the window. Peeking through the curtain, I saw the silhouette of someone standing in the middle of the yard, bathed in moonlight. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring at the house. I locked all the doors and windows, my heart racing. I immediately called the police. They arrived within minutes, but after thoroughly searching the property, they found no one. The only thing left behind was a set of footprints in the damp soil, circling my house multiple times. I moved out of that house the following week and have never returned.